Hong Kong is pushing patriotism among the young in the classroom. It's marked its first National Security Education Day since the controversial law was imposed. And for a closer look at what's happening in Hong Kong, Michael Davis from Jindal Global University joins us now. So, Professor, patriotism in the classroom, how do you think that's going to go down well? Or do you think a softer approach is more appealing to the young people?
Well, I think the problem is, and Beijing and the Hong Kong governments constantly commit this sin, is that they overreach in their approach to things and it always backfires. So trying to force people to be patriotic won't work. Having carrots or attractive things that make patriotism attractive does work. And what they've been doing lately with their policies in Hong Kong have the opposite effect. One leading politician told me that, well, you can teach patriotism in the class, but people will teach something else when they get home.
And so what do you make of this indoctrination then? Do you think there will be some backlash?
Well, certainly there's, people can't backlash openly because the freedom of expression is so tightly constrained right now in Hong Kong. So everything anyone speaks up about puts them at risk of being prosecuted under the national security law. So it's hard to know what form backlash will take. One form it will certainly take is because they're making it illegal now under these new elections to advocate not voting or blank ballots. So one kind of protest I expect to see in Hong Kong, well, people will do just that. If the government didn't pass such a law, perhaps they wouldn't do that. But now the government has put a sign out that this is a way to protest. Now, people can't advocate it. That's going to be a crime. But I think ordinary voters may be disgusted enough that they simply won't show up.
Well, one thing to note as well, Professor, is that Carrie Lam has, for the first time, linked the 2019 mass protests to the national security law. What do you read into that?
Well, of course, we all knew that. That's not news, that they passed the national security law because this increased opposition in Hong Kong. What they haven't done, and I wrote a book on this actually, what they haven't done is just listen to Hong Kong people. If over the years they had actually carried out the commitments they made under the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the Basic Law, and I think they would have peace in Hong Kong. Hong Kong people really historically were not that political. They certainly weren't radical. So it seems that the government in Beijing, both in Beijing and Hong Kong, are their own worst enemy when it comes to bringing about peace and order. And the national security law is having a real serious negative reaction from the public and probably will produce a lot of immigration out of Hong Kong.
And what do you make then of the police force adopting the PLA-style goose step then? Another sign, perhaps, that Hong Kong is becoming just another mainland city?
Maybe they should get a public relations advisor. Some of the things they do are just, as I've said already, it gets them in trouble. It makes everybody react very negatively and see them for what they are, that they're trying to impose a kind of authoritarianism on Hong Kong, which the society has never been used to having. And so, we don't know what's going to be like in 20 years, whether people somehow will be brainwashed and go along with this, but it's certainly not the case today.
Well, we don't know what's going to happen in 20 years, but in a few months, we know that elections are due. How much of Hong Kong's political landscape will change when the election happens?
Well, my guess is if you study this new election law, the bill has been drafted. Beijing has issued its own ruling on this. It so constrains any support for the pan-democratic camp in Hong Kong that my guess is most people will do exactly what this new government bill tries to outlaw, and that is they won't vote. Now, it's interesting because the prohibition is against conspiring to boycott the election. So it's not a crime to not vote. It's not a crime to submit a blank ballot. So they're in effect creating a crime for advocating something that's perfectly legal. which has its own legal problems. But I think where we're going to see the reaction, because people get arrested for almost anything else, is they probably will not show up to vote. And the government has put a sign out that this is a way to object.
Oh, sounds like you have more material to write another book. Thanks very much, Professor Michael Davis there from Jindal Global University.